Hello. We're starting early. Everyone's here. Amazing.
Thank you so much. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure my guest tonight needs absolutely no introduction, but I shall endeavour to do my very best. David Nicholls, a master storyteller, best-selling and internationally renowned author of Starter for 10, The Understudy, One Day, Us, Sweet Sorrow. His books have sold more than 9 million copies worldwide, have been translated into 40 different languages, and his fourth novel, Us, was longlisted for the Booker Prize. One Day, a much-beloved book, published in 2009, became a global bestseller, and its recent chart-topping Netflix adaptation, on which David was an executive producer, surpassed 23 million views in its first 3 weeks of release, becoming one of Netflix's most viewed English series globally. As one of the UK's most successful screenwriters, David has written adaptations of Far From the Madding Crowd, When Did You Last See Your Father, Great Expectations, as well as adapting his own novels Starter for 10, One Day, and Us. His adaptation of the Patrick Melrose novels by Edward St. Aubyn, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, no less, saw him nominated for an Emmy and won him a BAFTA for Best Writer. Amazon's best book of the year, David's sixth novel, You Are Here, is a story of Marnie and Michael, two lonely midlife souls, both a little lost. Theirs is a tale which unfolds over a 10-day walk over the lakes, the dales, and the North Yorkshire moors, over many miles and more than a few challenges. Marnie and Michael begin to share their stories, and walking and talking opens up the possibility of a new beginning. You Are Here is a story of first encounters, second chances, and finding the way home. It's witty and full of heart, just like its author. It should come as no surprise that David is known as the nicest man in publishing. There's no one who tugs at the heartstrings quite like he does. Please welcome our guest tonight, David Nicholls.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's so true. I mean, you've taken us through first loves, marriages ending, student days, friends to lovers, midlife second chances. I've got to ask, what is it about writing relationships that has always grabbed you?
Oh, well, it took a little while, I think, to find that subject area. I was a screenwriter before I was a novelist, and in screenwriting, it's a much more technical business. So often you're allocated a story. I worked for a long time on. The first thing I ever had produced was an adaptation of a Sam Shepard play called Simpatico, which is about a horse racing scam in California in the 70s. That really isn't my voice or my world. I don't know anything. I'd never watched a horse race to the end. So it was me kind of finding my way. Do I want to write screenplays? Do I want to write in this genre or that genre? I guess I owe a debt to, I think the first successful things I wrote for the screen, which was some episodes of Cold Feet. And I was very lucky to work on that show because it was a voice that I could do. I could write about that subject. I could get that tone. I liked writing for those actors. And so if I hadn't had that break, I'm not sure that I'd have then found my way into writing fiction. But I suppose I find the subject of relationships endlessly interesting. They're all love stories to a lesser or greater degree. Sometimes the love story element is quite small. Starter for 10 is, in my mind anyway, much more a novel about class and aspiration than it is a romantic comedy, but it's always there. And for me, it's just endlessly rich and interesting and funny. And I liked when I sort of settled into my own voice on Cold Feet and afterwards, I liked the idea that the serious and the comic could rub up against each other, and they weren't really they were inseparable. That the idea that comedy relates to happiness is for me a bit of a fallacy. Often the comedy has its roots in sadness and things going wrong, in embarrassment or rejection or unrequited love, or pride. All of those things seem to me to be a source of comedy and also of emotion. So it always felt natural when I finally settled into a voice. Felt natural that it should be a mixture of the serious and the comic. yeah, it took a long time. I've been writing fiction for 20 years, but I was a screenwriter for 8 years before that, and nothing really took off until my 40s, which often both publishing and film and TV are fixated on youth. So it did take me a little while. It was by no means overnight. It took me a little while to find a voice and find a tone and a subject matter.
But your very first sort of endeavours in writing were very much down the sort of comedy route, because you were, as you say, you were a screenwriter, before that an actor.
Yeah.
And if I want to take you right the way back to sort of your post-university New York days,
Yeah.
where you were writing letters as a source of entertainment for yourself, but your friends too, and that's how it sort of all started.
Yeah, I never for a moment thought of being a writer. I didn't really understand it. I didn't understand how that might happen. There didn't seem to be a route into it. Whereas, acting is an extremely precarious job, obviously, but there are structures. You can put on plays. You can if you're at school or college or university, there are ways of performing. Whereas actually writing, it felt a very presumptuous thing to do. And I don't have drawers full of poems or short stories or plays or anything at all. When I went to university, I grew up, I'm sure this will come up, but I grew up in Eastleigh, and I didn't really have any expectations of going to university. I kind of sort of fell into it. And when I did go, it was because I liked doing school plays. That was it. I just liked being in school productions. And I didn't dream of writing. And when I went to university, the focus was very much on devising work. I never at any point was encouraged to write a play to give to a group of people to put on. It was much more about 8 of us arguing and then putting on some terrible, pretentious piece of dance theatre or something. And the only writing I did was little bits of comedy. I kind of was sort of came of age at a kind of golden era of British TV comedy, which I loved and which I very much aspired to. So when I did first, the only thing I did that was remotely like writing was putting on sketches and skits and little bits of stand-up at university. And that's sort of what I wanted to pursue until quite a long way into my 20s. By rooting to write, the first thing I wrote, the first taste I had of the pleasure of writing was when I went to New York, as you say. I went to New York to try and be an actor. It's a terrible, terrible decision, ridiculous decision, really.
And bearing in mind, you hadn't really left the UK.
No, it's true. I had to get a passport to go. I'd never been anywhere. I'd never been on a plane, and I wanted to go a long way away and to be by myself. It was kind of a sort of self-inflicted loneliness, and so I went to. I won a scholarship to go and study at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy on the Upper West Side, and this tiny little box room, and it's the first day at AMDA. Was a dance class, and I realized instantly, I'd made the wrong decision. It was a chorus line, one from a chorus line, where you just put a stick under your armpit and you hold a top hat and you walk in a square. And I couldn't even do that. I mean, I couldn't tell left from right, and it was a disaster. And I got very disconsolate, and I would write these letters to my friends who I missed very much, friends I'd made at university who I really loved. And I would tell them funny stories, and we'll get lovely responses to these funny stories. And that was the first feeling I had that maybe writing might be something I could do. So yeah, it was through letter writing, which of course feels very old-fashioned now. It feels almost, I don't know if my kids will ever write a letter.
No. Yes,
and yet for
true.
me it was definitely my route into writing.
And the two stand-up people that you wrote to really encouraged you to take it further, didn't they? So it was Matthew and Claudia.
Yes, yeah. I had my two big breaks were Matthew Warchus, who now runs the Old Vic in London, a brilliant director, who I really wanted to, I used to do comedy skits with him, and I really wanted to be a double act and to do that professionally. And he was the funny one. So once he decided that he wasn't going to do it, that fell apart, that plan. And he used to cast me in productions during, in my 20s, playing very small parts that he thought I could get away with. And he would come and see me and, plays above pubs in London, and would always say afterwards, well done, and have you thought about writing? And Claudia was the same. Claudia was another friend of mine, a TV producer called Claudia Lloyd, who I used to tell these funny stories about. I used to work as, bartender and waiter and all of that stuff in my 20s and live in this terrible bedsit, and I turned these stories into anecdotes. And she said, there might be something in that, in the idea of waiters who want to be something else. So she very kindly, I wrote a script for her, a sitcom script, because again, I grew up in an age of sitcom. If I'm going to write anything, it'll be sitcom. And I wrote a half-hour sitcom about frustrated waiters, all of whom want to do other things. And she very kindly showed that to someone at the BBC, and a producer called Geoffrey Perkins, brilliant exec producer, and he gave me £200 as an option on it, and that was the first time I was paid to write. So those were the big breaks for me, and I'm very grateful to all those people who sensed that there was something else that I should do that wasn't that wouldn't mean inflicting my performances on that. It was a great day. The day came when I had to decide whether or not to renew my equity card, and it was a very good day for British theatre when, they were going to take it off me eventually, so it was just as well to give it up.
But you did. I mean, it's fair to say you did grace the backstage with, several very well-known actors.
Yeah.
Bill Nighy, Judi Dench, Harriet Walters. I mean, you were in 2 productions, weren't you?
I was in
Arcadia.
Arcadia, yeah. I was the understudy in the very first production of Tom Stoppard's Arcadia. I was understudying Sam West, and it was Emma Fielding, Rufus Sewell, Harriet Walter, Felicity Kendall, Bill Nighy, people I'd grown up watching on television. And there's it's very stratified, the acting world, and the understudies are very much in a different world to the actors. But I sat in. You have to go to all the rehearsals. I mean, every single rehearsal that the actor you're understudying, you have to be in the same room at all times. So you watch this play come together, and it's thrilling to sit in the same room as Tom Stoppard and see the rewrites come in every day, see the characters change slightly, see jokes work and sometimes not work and be removed or altered or tweaked. It's I didn't know it at the time, but it was a masterclass really in seeing a play being brought to life. I'd never really, I can say this now, never really liked going to the theatre. But I liked being in plays because it was, what I liked about it was writing. I liked characters and the forms and the structures and how jokes work and characters come to life. I loved all of that. I was at the National Theatre for about 5 years on and off. And it came to a climax really with the one part I'd always wanted to play was Constantine in The Seagull. Because I thought if I can do anything, I can do kind of neurotic students. And Constantine was the one part I thought I could probably do quite well. And so I got cast as the understudy of Constantine in The Seagull in a production with Dame Judi Dench and Bill Nighy and Helen McCrory, and I was understudying Alan Cox, and there was some incredible actors in that production. And I never went on, I just learnt the lines and watched the play. My role was second peasant. And at the beginning, for those of you who know the play, it starts with a play within the play. And I was sweeping the stage as the curtain came up. And then Judi Dench would come on, and I'd nod at Judi Dench, and then I'd leave. And that was my role. And again, at the time, it was fine. I was sort of 26, 27. I was, actually, those actors were all absolutely lovely and supportive and nurturing, tried to get me jobs. But I always thought it would be like the civil service and you'd work your way up to Hamlet, And it doesn't work like that. So I realized that my parts were getting smaller, not bigger, and that I should probably retire. And by that stage, I was reading scripts as well as trying to write them, reading a lot of scripts for the literary departments and realizing that actually that's what I'd always loved. Yeah.
I think for me, the funniness comes through. You are a very witty man, and you've described sort of the first draft of novels, sort of as someone trying to be funny at a dinner party. It's like
Yeah.
sort of, it's got all of the things that you've just talked about. Watching Tom Stoppard with the many iterations of a script, finding where the jokes fall, and you had such a good education in that in the theatre, I think, in those years. But how do you know now when you've got it right? How do you get from that knowing that you're trying to find where the jokes fall? What's the sweet spot for you between the sort of the tension, the romance, and the comedy?
Oh, well, I have very good... I don't necessarily trust my own instincts. I mean, there's definitely a moment when you're writing where you think, oh, it's flowing quite nicely. I know who these people are. This dialogue, I think, is okay. You know, you write it and you look back at it the next day and you're not horrified. You think it's flowing and it makes sense and it has a kind of rhythm to it. And then there's a lot of collaboration in writing fiction. You know, there's certainly, you spend most of the time by yourself, but I have very trusted readers who will tell me if it's a bit generic or if I've done it before or if it feels a bit lazy or familiar. And so when they do give the thumbs up and say, no, this is working, that's great. And I trust them very much. But I'm also a big fan of rewriting. You know, I do at least 4 pretty distinct drafts. And they're largely the same in that I've never really changed the story. The story is always the same. But I do, particularly with the second draft, I write the second draft from scratch. Because as you were saying, you know, a first draft is often tries too hard, you know, because no one's ever heard this story before, no one's ever met these characters before. So you do the writerly equivalent of overacting. You stress everything. You make all the characters too big. You make the twists too obvious. You know, it's all too big and loud. And that first draft will go to Johnny, my agent, and Fede, my now editor. And it'll take a little while, but they'll give me quite big notes. And if you go through and try and, I don't know how many of you are writers, but if you go through and try and tinker with a document that already exists, you'll never really get into the guts of it. You'll only ever change it superficially. So the second draft of every novel I write is always rewritten from scratch, typed up from scratch, with the first draft by my side. Because that way you can embed the notes and the feedback into every sentence rather than nailing it on. And then, you know, that process carries on for years and years and years. I mean, it takes me about 4 or 5 years to finish a novel, and that's not... Those drafts are very much sentence by sentence. And that's the same, I think, for most writers. Other writers maybe allow the drafts to be a little more fluid, a little more improvised, a little looser. But with comedy, I think, it's all about precision. You know, it's about the rhythm of a line or the precise word you use or the structure of the sentence. You know, to get the reader to laugh out loud, you have to spend a lot of time thinking about silly things like punctuation, whether it's a dash or a ... and what it looks like on the page and where you put in the stage directions and all of those things. Things that actually have a lot in common with performance. You know, the rhythm of dialogue, the way a joke delivers or lands, the shape of a monologue. You know, all of those things I think about a lot. And the great, gift you have as a writer is time. You know, you can spend a lot of time just tweaking and putting in new jokes and taking things out, and I would never want to rush that.
Do you think you would have known all those things or learnt those skills on the job if you hadn't been an actor and you hadn't been a screenwriter?
I think acting's I got a lot from it in terms of working out creating characters and making sure the biography is full before you give them anything to do.
Well, I was going to say, your plans are extremely detailed, aren't they? You know exactly everything about those characters before you sit down to write chapter 1.
Yes, I mean, some things change, but I would never, for instance, change a character's name in the middle of a draft. I'd feel like I'd done something really, like I'd gone on stage without knowing the lines. I'd feel, to continue the analogy, I'd feel like you need to know a lot about the biography of the characters and their physicality and their tone of voice. So before I even write, I only ever have 2 documents. One document is like a big baggy sketch pad. It's just full of everything. No one will ever see it, and everything goes in it for years, just ideas. So with this book, the idea of writing a novel set in spring, the idea of writing a novel about loneliness, the idea of setting a novel around a walk, the idea of someone from a copy editor. Marnie's a copy editor. What she might sound like, what her job might involve. Just endless notes, about 30, 40, 50,000 words worth of notes before I start writing the book. And when the thing you learn with screenwriting in particular, screenwriting really is about structure. A screenplay is a very bare document. I think if you hadn't read a screenplay, you might be shocked at how little detail it contains about emotion or expression. It's all about what characters say and what they do. That's all it is. It's just action and speech, nothing else. If you put in, he looks sullenly out the window, an actor will ignore that. So you've got to just really bear it down. And the thing that I learned most from screenwriting is that preparation, is making sure that everything has a kind of purpose and is in the right place. So the architecture of a script is absolutely vital. And on a show like Cold Feet, you write endless drafts of these horrible, very plain scene breakdowns to get the episode right before you're allowed to do the fun stuff, the improvised stuff, the dialogue. And I guess less so now, but when I started writing fiction, I was very, not schematic, well, a bit schematic, but I'd make sure that it was all blocked out before I started writing. Now I allow for a little bit more improvisation. But I do know the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I know what everything sort of does. When you hand in the script, a producer will always say, do we need this? What is this for? What does it do? And I don't think novels should be like that. I feel very strongly that novels ought not to be like that. And at the same time, I can't shake off that way of thinking. And I do like to know what this chapter is giving the reader, how it's changing things, how it's moving things on.
Yeah.
Whether it's repetitive, whether it's saying the same thing over and over again.
Whether it's tight enough.
Whether it's tight enough, yeah.
I think that's a fascinating look into what your process is, because I think all writers write differently.
Yeah.
Yours is born out of so many different things, of iterations of your careers before this. And in many ways, everything has come hand in hand to this point. And, one of the things that I've always found really fascinating about your work is I can't imagine which has come first, the story, the character, or the dialogue, because everything is so beautifully hand in hand.
Yeah.
But there must be a point when you're thinking up a new novel where the bare bones of it are so you can't quite put your finger on it. What is it that comes to you first?
Often it's this sounds really vague, and it's what I want the reader to feel. Yeah. Often it's an emotion. Like with One Day, I wanted it to have a kind of anthemic, orchestral feel to it. I wanted it to be big and emotional and funny and sad and sort of triumphant at times and tender at other times, like a pop song with an orchestra in. I wanted it to be big and loud, and possibly looking back a little bit vulgar, but to be noisy and emotional. And with this book, I wanted it to be much more like a chamber piece, for it to be much more close up, for it to be much more voice-led, and to have a kind of melancholy to it, and a sort of yearning and tenderness and the feeling of spring. So often, something as small as the idea of a season. This is my spring book, and the book before this, Sweet Sorrow, is meant to feel like the last day of August. It's meant to feel like that sadness you have when you realize the summer's over and life's about to begin, and you're not quite sure what it's going to feel like. A sense of youth and regret tangled up. And this book, I wanted it to feel sort of hopeful and like the days lengthening, and that sounds really, really vague, but that kind of tone then suggests story and character, and they all kind of arrive not at the same time because it takes years, but they're all entangled, really, I guess.
So with that, this idea of hopefulness and thinking of character, can you tell us a little bit about Marnie and Michael?
Sure. Yes, so You Are Here. The origins of You Are Here was that every year I'd go on a long walk, or sometimes twice a year if I can, by myself. It has to be by myself, and it has to be about just 4 or 5 days away from home. And it has to start at a railway station, end at a railway station, and I have to walk a long way each day and try to stay offline and think. And that's something I've done for years, and it was suggested to me that that might make a book. I turned up at a party straight off the train, looking really kind of like sunburnt and bruised and exhausted. And someone said, "Where have you been?" And I told them, and it was someone who worked at my publishers, and they said, "Oh, you should write a non-fiction book about these walks and what they mean to you." And I didn't want to do that, but I did want to write about it because it's very much a post-lockdown book in that was one of the things I really craved in lockdown. I really was desperate to get out and walk and to see the countryside and to spend some time by myself. And at the same time, I was aware that a lot of my very good friends had spent lockdown by themselves and were finding the process of stepping back out into the world rather difficult. And that seemed to me to be an interesting theme, the idea of solitude and loneliness and the difference between the two. So I had these two ideas. Writing a book about someone walking by themselves would be absolutely possible, but it makes more sense for them to walk with someone, and it makes more sense if they don't necessarily want to be walking together. So you think, well, how can I bring that about? How can I put these two people in the same space and have them, that classic road movie thing of two unlikely people who, for whatever reason, are forced to go on a journey together. How can I do that without it feeling too contrived? So it became this idea about a group walking weekend in which everyone gradually drops out except for these two last people, both of whom really want to be by themselves. And but
for very different reasons.
For very different reasons. So Michael is a geography teacher who lives in York, and his marriage has recently broken down. He's separated rather than divorced. He's still very much in love with his wife, and he has quite recently suffered a kind of a trauma which has lingered with him, and he's a passionate walker, and he wants to walk it off. He wants to walk across the country. There's something, he wants to make one of those big journeys that has a kind of shape and an ending and feels like a rite of passage. And so he's walking the coast-to-coast path, which starts in St. Bees in Cumbria and goes all the way to Robin Hood's Bay in Yorkshire. And Marnie is a copy editor, a London-based copy editor who had a terrible marriage in her 20s and has since lived by herself, perfectly happily by herself, loves her work, loves books, loves the experience of reading, that sense of happy solitude that she finds in fiction, and she is kind of pressurized into going on this group walking holiday because she's become, as her friend Cleo says, it's like she's come back from a long journey and not told anyone. She hasn't really been in the world. And so they're all brought together in a group, and eventually it's whittled down to Michael and Marnie. And each section of the novel is a section of the coast-to-coast walk. I don't know if anyone here has walked the coast-to-coast. Has anyone done this? Yeah? Oh, yes, there. Well, it's quite an experience, isn't it? It's when I started writing this book, I wasn't sure what the walk was going to be. It couldn't be the South West Coast Path because that's been written about very well, and it couldn't be the Dales Way or the South Downs Way, or it had to feel like it had a lot of variety in it and a kind of epic quality to it. And the Coast to Coast has that. The Coast to Coast has all these traditions, like you're meant to pick a pebble up in St. Bees and carry it across the country and throw it in the sea in Robin Hood's Bay. And it has 3 acts, as the lakes, the Dales, the Pennines and the Dales, and the Moors. And the acts kind of correspond to the action of the novel. And
it's their journey of coming together, or what is happening to
and
it.
their relationship changing day by day. So day one is,
There's also a fair amount of bleakness, which I think makes for the perfect comedy too.
Yeah.
Because along the way, there are so many different challenges, which Marnie has all the gear and no idea, and he's, Michael is a seasoned walker, and they are there for very, very different reasons.
Yeah.
I think what I loved so much about it is line by line very, very funny.
Thank you.
But also that feeling of this is a novel for you, which we've seen you write about going backwards a lot. This is a novel which is very present.
Yeah.
You Are Here is as much about the map location as it is about where they are in their lives. And there's a frankness to this, which I think is really interesting. I know you've talked about novels being written at particular times in your life. This feels very much a novel of, this is who I am. There's an openness, a frankness to it. Was that always a decision to set it in the present?
Yeah, I don't read reviews, but I did know that someone had said in the review of Sweet Sorrow, my previous novel, which was set in 1997, that I was sort of hooked on nostalgia, and that obviously One Day is very specific in its cultural references, and Sweet Sorrow was as well. I mean, there were lots of reasons to set it in 1997, but I was aware of that criticism, and I thought I should engage in the world. And the idea was that I'd write a big, state of the nation, modern London novel. And then lockdown happened, and you thought, well, I don't know write about this. This is really unappealing. This is horrible. I mean, that's not to say it can't be written about. It definitely can be written about, but it wasn't what I wanted to write about. And so I did want to write something about the present day, but it isn't, it isn't a kind of documentary type novel about where we are, except, I suppose, in that it does have a kind of post-COVID feel to it. And I guess maybe it does tie into something about loneliness and isolation and how what's expected of us at certain times of our lives. Both Michael and Marnie had, if you'd spoken to them in their 20s, they would have had an expectation of their life being a particular way, of being parents, of being in a relationship, and neither of them are. And there's a certain taboo around that in society, despite the fact that it is, for most of us, part of our lives. We'll all spend a part of our life feeling very lonely, or happily alone. So I wanted to write. When you write love stories, often solitude is the thing which must be escaped. It's natural. It's the motor of a love story. Is how do I stop being by myself? And yet, I'm often, solitude is a part of my work. It's something I actually also really enjoy. Many of my friends who aren't in long relationships are perfectly happy with that. And so I wanted to write about solitude in a way that was frank and didn't have that kind of judgment in it. I think often if we find ourselves alone for whatever reason, we can feel as if we're being judged, as if we've done something wrong, and as if there's a reason for it. And I sort of wanted to explore that and try and remove some of the taboo, while at the same time giving some of the pleasures you'd expect from a love story.
I mean, I think there's a wonderful line in the book where Marnie talks about being child-free, and she says there's an expectation that everyone's imagining she's, drunk every night and doing smack, and the reality.
You can do anything you want.
You can do anything you want, and I think it is that sort of frankness which I think you take us to the brink of what our expectations are, and I think that is part of the beauty of this book, is the fact that you have such big landscapes and such intimate conversations. And I know that the book was your original title was Walking and Talking, and it's definitely got that feel of you can say anything because you're not facing the person you're having to talk to.
Yes.
You just have these wonderful, intimate details about their lives, and they share such incredible things. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it. I'm trying very hard not to. But it's the idea that you can share something perhaps with somebody that you don't know very well, especially if you don't have to look them in the eye and you're not on a date.
No, and they're with each other. They're doing 9-hour walks, so they've got time to fill, and it leads to a kind of opening up. I mean, with Marnie in particular, Michael's a little bit more restrained until the second half of the book, but Marnie is very funny and very urbane, and she's had all these experiences in this terrible marriage, and she hasn't really talked about it. And suddenly she finds herself with someone she doesn't know particularly well, who seems extremely gentle and open and non-judgmental, and she tells these great long monologues because she's witty, I hope, and because she has a particular turn of phrase, they're funny. Yeah.
I think, too, there's the idea that Marnie is so precise in her day job. And as a copy editor, you get such a sense of she knows exactly what's written and what's between the lines.
Yeah.
And so you get a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication. And we're hearing all of those things, of all the things she thinks, or he thinks too, Michael too, all the things that he wished he hadn't said or shouldn't have done. And I think there's such a beauty in that. Dialogue is such an important part of this book, and it shapes the rhythm of the speech. And that sort of inner-outer voice is played out through the music too. Can you tell us a little bit, for those who haven't read it?
Yes.
It's not spoiling it, I promise. But music plays,
music
and
too.
it does play a huge part in lots of your novels, but this one particularly is quite special.
Yes. I mean, just going back to the previous point, I guess I was talking earlier about, how screenwriting has sort of influenced my process of writing a book. And yet I do want to kind of emphasize, I don't think that's how books should be. I mean, I for me, that they're intertwined, but when I first handed in a manuscript, my first draft of my novel to my editor, the great note I had, a brilliant editor called Mary Evans, she said, it's okay to tell the reader what they're thinking, because screenplays are so much about action and dialogue, and I wasn't taking full advantage of this great gift you have as a novelist of inner life, of inner monologue, of someone saying something and then regretting that they've said it, or someone saying something and then revealing the truth, or someone remembering something. I mean, memory doesn't really belong in scripts. You don't, unless you have a long, boring monologue where a character says, "God, it's a bit like that time when." That really won't cut it in the script, because a script is about the here and now. But with a novel, you can move very fluidly through the character's consciousness and memories and inner voices, and I love that. I love being able to do that, because then when I go to screenwriting, I can't do that at all. It has to be always about action and things moving and things changing. And the second thing we were talking about, music. Yeah, I was very aware of having done this thing of 1997, which was the setting for Sweet Sorrow. There was a lot of music in that book as well, and that's because it was the music that you love music so much, and music affects you so much at the age of 16, 17, it seemed to me. I wanted to capture that. And I was also aware of doing this thing which writers sometimes do, which is forcing their mixtape on the reader, saying, these are songs I love, these are books I love, but particularly songs. That I did that a lot in one day, and especially when we adapted it recently, because music is something I'm really, really passionate about. And with this book, I thought, you mustn't do that. You mustn't. This isn't a mixtape, it's a novel. And you've got to do something slightly different. So there's a set piece where Michael and Marnie have run out of things to say, and Marnie has this idea, which is that they're going to shuffle each other's entire music library, not the greatest hits, not the playlist, not the music that shows how cool they are, but everything. And they're not allowed to skip anything. They're not allowed to select anything. They just have to shuffle at random. And so there's a sequence where they listen to 7 or 8 songs, and the songs become a kind of springboard for them to talk about, their past, their experiences, their family, their memories. And it was just a nice kind of riff. It was just a nice little game to play for me as a novelist. And when I was writing that chapter, there were lots of songs. I mean, I would just pick a song at random and imagine what Michael and Marnie would say about it or what it would mean to them. So my German publisher the other day said, we'd love to put this mixtape online. And I said, you really don't know. It really doesn't work.
Read the book, you'll know what he means exactly. But one could be, you could think, well, are these your greatest hits?
By no means. No, I deliberately chose songs that I either am indifferent to or actively dislike. Yeah.
But I think it's so beautiful. It's the idea. I mean, Marnie says, no skipping, no censoring, just the real you.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a way of getting, for us, the reader, to get to know the characters too. Yeah. For you to be able to deliver the most beautiful backstory into their lives, but also for them to get to know each other, which is what the whole journey is about.
Well, they're at the stage of the journey where they're starting to reveal other stuff, where they're starting to reveal the stuff that isn't performance, that isn't their best side. And there was a chapter in One Day where Dexter finds a mixtape that Emma had made for him, many, many years before. And it's one of the things, when you make a friend, particularly at that age, it comes up quite early, doesn't it? What music do you like? I don't know how my kids do it now, but certainly I was always handing out mixtapes, but as a kind of expression of character. This is the part of me I want you to know about. And in You Are Here, it's not quite that. It's here's everything, warts and all.
Now, we can't not spend some of tonight talking about One Day. I mean, we have referenced it, both you and I, all night. And I know the audience. I mean, is there anyone here who hasn't read it? I mean, don't put up your hand now. You couldn't possibly put up your hand now. But, I mean, it was everywhere when it first came out. And again, that's sort of the beauty of the Netflix adaptation has been for you, that all those people who didn't really know David Nicholls now get to know David Nicholls.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, but I think, we were talking about this a little earlier, the idea that this has opened up your work to a whole different generation of people. How has it been to see your work through different eyes? No,
I've been phenomenally lucky. I mean, you're lucky if your book gets made into a film, and the difficulty with that book is it's quite a big book. It's probably by a long way the longest book I've ever written, and it covers 20 years. And when it came out, the thing to do, the marker of a book that had taken off was to turn it into a film. And film is a very tight form. If commercially, probably you want it to be 100 minutes long, and if it's covering 20 years, then that's 5 minutes a year. So it's always going to be an exercise in précis and cramming things in. And of course, you can make some years 15 minutes and some years 2 minutes, but you're always just going to be hacking away. And since the book came out in 2009, there's this whole other form that's been invented, really, a whole other media, which is episodic streaming television, where the episodes can be as long or short. They don't have to fit a TV schedule, so they can be 15 minutes, they can be 45 minutes. The shortest episode of One Day is 16 minutes, and the longest is 40 minutes. And that didn't really exist before. Neither did the idea of an international release, where it's seen everywhere around the world on the same day. That has implications for the budget, which means that you can shoot things on a slightly grander scale. You can go to Greece, you can go to Paris, you can go to Rome, because you have these resources. You can cast differently because you won't be able to get. It's going to take you 9 months to shoot 7 hours, and so you're unlikely to be able to get a big brand name. And so audiences have been very good with the streaming services of being more open-minded about casting in terms of unknown actors, new actors, fresh faces. So all of those things. The distinctive quality of that book structure is it's episodic. It's about the episodic nature of life. It's about snapshots. Here's a photograph of this day. Here's a photograph of this day. Here's a photograph of this day. And there's an almost perfect alignment of that form of the novel and the form of a show on Netflix or a streaming service. And so it came up about 5 years ago. A good friend of mine said, I think this might work much, much better as a streaming series with 1 episode per year. Do you want to write that? And it was such an old book for me. I'd written the book when my son was born, and my son is just gone to university. So it's that old. It was published in 2009, but I started writing it in 2006. So it's a long, long time ago, and I felt like it was written by someone else and that it needed a fresh pair of eyes. So a wonderful writer called Nicholls did most of the screenwriting with a small team of writers, and they let me very kindly write 1 episode, do a little kind of cameo writing job on episode 13, the penultimate episode. And it was bliss. The whole experience was incredibly happy. I made it with friends. The people we brought on were wonderful, talented people, brilliant young directors, a lot of whom were much. I always thought the appeal of this book is going to be nostalgia. It's going to be a book for people my age. And it was really shocking to realize in production that, Ambika and Leo weren't born until episode 10. I mean, they literally I was watching The Rushes. There's a very funny bit where they have to explain to Amika how to use a payphone. When you put the money in, because that's all of that stuff. They don't remember time before the internet. They don't remember.
Did you find that the characters changed through their portrayal of them?
Yeah, definitely.
And that must be a wonderful thing, to see your work revitalised.
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's what I love. I love actors, and I love what they bring, and I love interpretation and the spin they put on a line. And Nicole, the process of adaptation is often about selection, and a different dramatist will select different material. And Nicole, I think, had a very good eye for the stuff that was about friendship. She drew out working very closely with Ambika, who's a brilliant actress, but also incredibly insightful and intelligent. They talked a lot together about things that they might draw out of the novel, things that might change. So there's a different emphasis, I think. I think the Dexter that Leo portrays is a lot more likable and vulnerable and self-aware than the character on the page. So often, novelists are meant to rage against the adaptation and feel angry and embittered, all the stuff that got changed. But there are so many things that to me seem like improvements. She toned down, for instance, Dexter's promiscuity and arrogance. There's a lot more of that in the novel. He's a lot more strutting and unpleasant in the novel. And I think that was the right thing to do. Still, there's very little in the adaptation that isn't in the novel, but the material that's selected is very smart, and it's a very beautiful, sensitive piece of writing from Nicole and acting from Ambika and Leo. And so I'm very grateful for it being changed in lots of ways, and especially because I was allowed to be involved, and allowed to have a lot of say in the casting and the editing and the music and all of those things. Yeah.
You've talked about You Are Here being the closest to the intention of a novel that you've ever managed. Why is that, do you think? And do you think that the way that you write about relationships has changed the older that you get?
Well, yes, I guess the other harsh fact I have to face is that I'm a lot older than the characters in You Are Here. I've my first 3 novels, I was very much writing about characters who are my age. I'm exactly the same age as Emma and Dexter. I was the same age as I very much knew the world of the understudy and started for 10. In other words, Brian in started for 10 goes to university in 85, which is when I went. So I was writing kind of documentary stuff about I know what it felt. I know what 1993 felt like. I know what it felt like to be that age at that time. With the 4th novel, with Us, I thought, well, I better write about someone older than me because I don't want to get caught in this rut. I don't want to get older with my characters. And so I tried to put my mind into the body of a 58-year-old man, which is what I am now, and to think ahead, think into the future. And with You Are Here, I'm actually going back quite a long way. Marnie is 20 years younger than me. But it just felt like I could do the voices, if that doesn't sound too silly. It just felt like I kind of I knew who they were. And I also spent a lot, it's the shortest novel I've ever written. I wanted it to be a novella. Everything I ever write, I always think this is going to be a novella. This is going to be 40,000 words tops. It's going to be like Great Gatsby. It's going to be very short and tight. And they always expand, but it's still the shortest thing I'd ever written, less than 80,000 words. And so I was just very careful, sentence by sentence. It was much more heavily edited than anything I've ever done. And, I'm really proud of it. And feel like it marks a kind of a change, and now I've got to do it again. I don't know what to do next, but this experience has been really lovely, especially writing it alongside the process of making One Day.
Yes, it's like different bits of your career have caught up with you all at once.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, honestly, I could talk to you for hours, but our time is coming nearer, and your novels. I mean, there's so much that we could to bring together about One Day and You Are Here, not least their structural link, which is the idea of distance and time. And your novels take us through all of life's sort of really big emotions, and they remind us very much of what a great book is all about. The fact that the story stays with you and it shapes you in some way. The fact that One Day is still so popular, even now, even to a new audience, shows the power of a really beautiful story of friendship and love. And I know you say you're not a conventional romantic, But I think your stories show us all the ways in which love can be meaningful and how it all starts out and where it ends up. And I think your characters have made us fall in love with them. You've made us cry. You've made us laugh. You've given us hope. And your writing holds so much honesty, David.
Thank you.
You remind us also of the power of fresh socks.
Oh,
And
yeah.
for that, I'm entirely grateful. And I know you've
look at
said
my
that you
socks.
don't know how many more novels you have in you, but I think on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to say, please just keep writing.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. David
Thank you very
Nicholls,
much.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for coming along. Are we doing a Q&A or? Thank you.
Now we've got a little time for some questions.
Thank you.
So please speak nice and clearly and try and keep your question nice and concise, like a good screenwriter. Yes.
Hi
there.
Thank you for tonight. So inspiring. Big fan.
Thank you.
As a fellow writer, I'm sort of at the stage I'm sort of querying with agents and stuff. I'd just be interested in your experience or any sort of advice to get a book published. You know, we would talk a lot about how to write a book, but it's the other side of it now. So it's kind of...
I mean, I feel a little bit wary, if only because I did it, such a long time ago, 22 years ago, since I got an agent and a publisher, and I've always stayed with the same people. I was, I guess, privileged in that when I didn't write a whole novel. I wrote a sort of self-contained 10,000-word section from start of a 10 with a very detailed synopsis. And the full story is that I wanted to write about university and my experience of going to university, which was a big change for me and a wonderful time in my life, but also quite a culture shock. I wasn't really expecting it. And I knew that wouldn't really cut it as a film because there's no UK tradition of, we sort of dislike students so much that, you know what I mean? I mean, there's no, you wouldn't go and see, it's not like a college movie in America. It's a different world. And I knew it wouldn't work as a TV series because all the commissioners said no journalists, no students, no actors. That was the rule. And so I thought, well, maybe it's like a dramatic monologue. And that's how I started writing it. And then I realized it was fiction. And I wrote this sort of comic set piece that was almost self-contained, the bit where he goes to stay with this girl's parents for a disastrous weekend. And I was very, very lucky in that, I'd written on cold feet, so it could go out to agents with, showed it to a friend, she showed it to an agent, the agent agreed to represent me, but it could go out with a covering letter that said, David is a writer on cold feet, and that was a big, big help. So I think it's much, much harder to go in unknown, and I suppose in that respect I'm a little bit useless in giving advice, except to say that I would check what agents are looking for, research that, follow them on social media, because sometimes they will be, rarely, but sometimes they will be looking for submissions. Look at the writers you admire and see who represents them. That might not always help because they may feel that you're doubling up, but it will give you a sense of their taste. Check the requirements. Do they require a whole manuscript? Do they require a sample and a synopsis? And I guess the biggest change between when I started out and now is there's much more of an online community of writers. There's much more. It feels like in many ways it can feel overwhelming and a little bit frightening. The idea of writers groups and writers communities. You can feel it can make you feel rather as if it's all a little bit too much. But at the same time, it can also be very supportive and informative. And so I would try and get involved in that. My specific experience is so specific that it's probably not very helpful. But the last thing I would say is only send out work that you're really, really, really proud of. Don't send out work that you think needs work, or you want some notes because it'll only ever get read once, and agents and publishers aren't in the process, aren't in the business of back and forth. They want to read stuff that blows them away. So it needs to be very as polished as you can make it, which isn't to say it's finished and won't be edited, but it's your best work. That's all I can say.
Brilliant.
Really.
We'll take a question there, Adam. Yes, thank you.
Hello, thanks for coming to Winchester.
Oh, pleasure.
I'm interested in your baggy book.
Oh, yeah.
So in terms of process, do you have a book for each idea? Or do you have one book that has lots of ideas in it and lots of different sections? How do you make that work?
I have two documents. One document is the novel itself, which is the only draft and always is readable. It's always proofread. It's always polished. It's spell checked. The characters' names are consistent all the way through, and that gradually expands during the writing process. And then I have this sketchbook in which which the beginning will never represent the end. And if I wake up in the night and I think of a line or a joke or an idea for a scene, I will put it in the sketchbook. I will put it in that document, and write it in such a way that it makes sense to me, but needn't make sense to anyone else. And then the other great editor is time. And what I did with this book is I had this document which was initially called Spring, and then was called Walking and Talking, and then was actually it was always called Walking and Talking. That grew and grew and grew, and then I went away and did something else, and then I went back to it and I printed it out and I read it through with a pen in my hand, and I looked for the things that I still liked and still felt good to me, and that became the basis for the next stage of writing, which was much more about improvising dialogue for Marnie and Michael, doing the research. So I went on the coast to coast, which was incredibly useful because you're kind of improvising on location. You're thinking, what could happen by this lake? What could happen in this rain? What are they saying, on this boring road? And what are they going to do to pass the time? And so research is definitely part of the process, but quite a late part of the process. That's what I do when I know who the characters are and where it's going to take place. And again, that all goes in the sketchbook. And it may well be that every now and then I'll copy out something from the sketchbook into the manuscript, or click and drag it across. But more often than not, I like typing and retyping is a really useful part of the writing process because the words have a kind of value. They have a kind of worth because there's labor involved.
Well, is it like speaking it aloud?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Speaking aloud is part of the process because you very quickly realize when you're repeating yourself or getting bored. And so all of that is silly things. I mean, I'm really, I hope this isn't boring, I'm really interested in how other writers do it. But silly things, ways to make the text unfamiliar to you. So changing the font or the spacing, things like that. Always editing on paper is something that's very important to me because on screen you just go into we read so much on screens. It's very hard. You get hypnotized slightly. You don't really concentrate on each sentence. So I do all of those things to make it feel fresh and for me to be critical of it, to spot the things that are a bit lame or a bit boring or a bit repetitive. And so the scrapbook is awful. It's really awful. I mean, it makes no sense. But buried in it, I suppose what I'm pushing against, for me, only for me, is the idea that the way novels are written in movies, which is a novelist sits down and writes chapter 1, and then they kind of walk this, they walk this tightrope, which is from the beginning to the end, without falling off, without running out, without a story, becoming a cul-de-sac, or without a character no longer making sense. That's, for me, impossible to do. But if I can amass this great pile of material and kind of root around in it and find things that I really like and am proud of, that's a much better way of writing. So that the movie cliche is for me anyway not the way to do it. And that's not always the case. Wonderful writers like Muriel Spark and Anita Brooker, they started chapter 1, they didn't do any preparation, they started typing, they typed all the way to the end, they didn't revise, and wrote marvelous, beautiful, brilliant books. But I've never really been able to do that. So
we love and hate them.
Yes.
All at the same time. Yes. Can we have? Can we do 2? 1 there, and then this person here, there, Adam. Thank you.
Sure.
Shall I go first? So now that so many of your books have been adapted into films and TV, does it affect the way you write now? And do you sort of think more visually? Do you think about who the characters could be played by? Or
no, I always sound a bit defensive about this. I mean, I genuinely try not to. I think film and television is definitely a part of me as a novelist. I grew up reading books in front of the TV. I grew up watching hours and hours and hours of TV and films in particular. And I love dialogue. I love I tend to naturally write a 3-act structure. I don't intend to. It comes out that way. I guess so. It'll always be there, but I do want to kind of luxuriate in the freedom that you have as a novelist. Because the blank page of a novelist is blanker. Listen to this beautiful sentence. Than the blank page of a screenwriter. A screenwriter has to think about genre, they have to think about budget, they have to think about the other comparable films, they have to think about the practicalities of getting this thing made. And a novelist has terrific freedom. There is no budget for a novel. And so I try and luxuriate in that and take full advantage of that in things like memory. There are things that are wonderful on the page that are almost impossible on film, like seeing a child grow up. Almost impossible on film because you have to keep changing the actor and you never quite believe it's the same person. So memory is really, really, really hard. So I would never not pursue, if I had a good novel idea, I would never discard it because it's unadaptable. They're so precious, I leap on them. At the same time, I know that I do things that are akin to screenwriting. The shape of a scene, the way a chapter ends and the next chapter begins. I know that I've brought things from screenwriting, and I think that's okay. I don't know. I think it's quite a common and valid criticism to say it reads a bit like a screenplay, and I try to avoid that by taking advantage of the form.
I think you have done it okay.
Okay.
You've sold, it's 9 million copies of your books. Well, that's not too bad.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take the last question, the gentleman here. Thank you so much.
I'm just coming to the end of your most recent book.
Thank you.
And now you've explained that I think it takes you 5 or 6 years to do the next one. There's a pretty good chance I might not be around by then.
No.
So,
I'll be quick.
This book is so hopeful.
I just wondered if you could let us know one or two of your favourite authors, so that I could move on to them, maybe.
Oh no! It was all going so well, David.
Okay, let's try and lift the mood.
Okay, so these both One Day and You Are Here. You Are Here does have some sort of inspiration drawn from Forster,
Yes,
and
definitely
you have been working on a sort of an introduction for a new edition of Howard's End, haven't you?
Yeah. But very briefly, every book I write has a kind of little pile of reference books that I'm aspiring to. So with this, Room with a View is very important to me, and it's very weird being in Winchester and growing up in Eastleigh, because I was immediately memories come back of the books I loved when I was young here. So Hardy was very big for me, and One Day, the idea of One Day is buried in Tess of the D'Urbervilles. There's a little bit of Gabriel Oak in Michael in this book. Hardy I loved as a teenager, and Dickens as well was very, very important to me. I think more recently, I was a student of the syllabuses that were very kind of male and white, and now I try and read a little in a more diverse way. I guess I'm enjoying a lot of mid-20th century female writers, like I mentioned Anita Bruckner. Anita Bruckner is, in my mind, a very underrated writer and the great writer of Loneliness. And I love Penelope Fitzgerald. She's probably my favorite 20th century writer. And Muriel Spark, again, is someone I draw on a lot and think about a lot. A lot of really wonderful American fiction. I've drawn a lot in the earlier books from Salinger, because he's great on youth and the sort of idealism of youth, and Scott Fitzgerald for his kind of lyricism. But I'm trying to, the books I read, I would definitely have been a different writer if I hadn't read Great Expectations at 15. Those books just seep into everything you write. They're kind of deeply ingrained.
And again, landscapes, literature, journeys, which have made it into all of your books in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm hoping that we've got another David
I'll
Nicholls
be quick, I promise.
one before, but just in case. Thank you again. again so much to David. You've been such a joy to chat to. He really is the nicest man in publishing, everyone.
Excuse me.
David Nicholls.
Sorry, gross. But thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Just like to congratulate and thank you again very much indeed for coming to see us. And as an Eastleigh boy, then it was really lovely for us to be able to work with the library and to be able to film this so that we can share it afterwards for a wider audience, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I should, just very briefly as a coda to that, I mean, I'd definitely not be a writer if it wasn't for Eastleigh Library. I mean, that was my absolute home. So, yeah, thank you.
And I really hope someone's got that.
Yeah.
I hope someone's recorded that. Eastleigh Library shout out. Amazing.